Military officials have confirmed that at least 11 U.S. service members were injured when Iran launched missiles at an Iraqi military base last week after previously saying no Americans were harmed. Skylar Henry reports.
The Pentagon has revised its casualty assessment after Iran's retaliatory missile strike on 2 bases in Iraq. It was initially reported no U.S. troops were killed or injured, even though the bases took several direct hits. And it's what President Trump said the next day.
No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe.
But now, U.S. Central Command says 11 service members suffered concussions in the attacks. They were removed from Iraq for treatment, 8 going to Germany, the others to Kuwait. Each is being monitored for signs of traumatic brain injury and other symptoms. Doctors say concussion symptoms can take days to become apparent. The White House has not commented on the new information. A U.S. military spokesman said the injured soldiers had been, quote, in the vicinity of a blast. He added that all of them are expected to return to their posts in Iraq once they're determined fit for duty. Some soldiers who were at the base told CBS News they had little warning and had just minutes to take cover before the missiles landed. Most took cover in bunkers that were not designed to withstand the force of a ballistic missile strike. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now from the Pentagon. Hi, David. So does this news change the status of tensions between the U.S. and Iran? It seems that both sides had a lot riding on the fact that no U.S. troops were killed and presumably injured.
Well, I don't think this is going to change the status of tensions. But let's face it, tensions are still fairly high. Remember in that same speech in which he said no Americans were harmed, President Trump also said the Iranians are standing down. They've taken their forces off the alert level they had, put them in for that missile attack. But that doesn't mean the tensions are standing down. And just today, it's being reported that the Ayatollah is telling his people that the Revolutionary Guard will continue their battle against American forces in the region, which basically means they're going to keep doing what they've been doing ever since 1983, when Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a proxy of the Iranian regime, when Hezbollah in Lebanon first blew up the American embassy and then blew up an American Marine barracks, killing 242 servicemen. So the tensions with the Iranian regime, which actually began with the seizure of the U.S. embassy in Tehran back in 1979, those tensions continue.
And David, what is the military saying about reports the U.S. has resumed anti-ISIS operations in Iraq after the Iraqi parliament voted to expel foreign troops?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by operations. The U.S. and Iraqi troops are still located side by side at the same bases and in the same headquarters. But officials here say that while they are continuing planning operations, they haven't yet gone back out in the field. U.S. troops haven't yet gone back out in the field to conduct operations. So there's still a bit of a pause in the operations against ISIS.
And David, Iran's supreme leader led Friday prayers in Tehran today for the first time in 8 years, so that's significant. He told worshipers that the Revolutionary Guard could take its fight beyond Iran's border after the U.S. killed their top general. How is the Pentagon reacting to threats like that from Iran?
Well, that's not exactly news. I mean, this whole last confrontation with Iran began when an Iranian-backed militia in Iraq launched 31 rockets into a base where U.S. troops were located. I mean, that's how Iran conducts its drive to force all U.S. troops out of the Middle East. That's its objective, and so it's been going after targets that either are American or are American interests for most of its 40-year life as a revolutionary regime. And the fact that the Supreme Leader is saying that the fight will continue, I guess you can take that to mean that they're not going to shift and say, okay, we're ready for negotiations, which of course is what the Trump administration wants. The Trump administration wants to negotiate a new agreement with Iran that would replace the nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated with them several years ago.
And is it possible, David, that the public face of the Iranian government is sending one message to the people there and privately sending other messages through negotiating channels to the U.S.?
I think it's not just possible. It's very likely. I mean, in public, you can't be seen to back down, but the Iranian regime is in a lot of trouble. These economic sanctions, which are only promised to get stricter, have really added to the economic difficulties of that regime. You can't blame or credit, whichever you want, the sanctions for causing all of the economic difficulties of the regime, because corruption and just plain mismanagement are also at play here. But they are in a world of economic hurt, and it's starting to show with these protests. There were when the regime had to raise the price of gasoline, there were protests, and the crowds have been very, very brutally repressed, but they keep coming out. Most recently to protest the accidental downing of that Ukrainian airliner, which of course it took the Iranian regime about 2 or 3 days to admit to. And I've seen reports, and I can't confirm this firsthand, I've seen reports that some in the crowd, which usually chant death to America, were actually chanting death to the Ayatollah.
Wow. All right. David, quickly, before we run out of time, though, I do want to ask you about a report coming out of CNN that Saudi Arabia has paid the U.S. approximately $500 million to begin covering the costs of U.S. troops there. Do you have any way of confirming that report? And if so, is there an ethical, optical problem with this?
Well, look, this has been one of President Trump's pet peeves since he was a candidate. The notion that that other countries do not pay their fair share for the protection they get from the U.S. military. And when he was approving the deployments of the past 6 months, this large buildup that has taken place in and around Saudi Arabia, he specifically told his aides that he wanted Saudi Arabia to pay for this. Whether or not they've actually arrived at a number of $500 million, I'll bet you that's still being negotiated, just the way the U.S. is still negotiating with South Korea over how much South Korea is going to pay for the basing of U.S. troops there. This has just been an issue for the president since day one.
All right. Well, then there seems like there may be some truth there. All right. Well, David Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing.